Hello, Rabbi. All well?
Good afternoon. Thank God, Kent, and you?
Okay, thank you. A bit soft. Just hold on. Let me see if it's my side. No, it was my side. Sorry. No, fine.
Okay, just give me a minute to get the screen share up.
Sure. Hi, David.
Hello, Kent.
Hi, David.
Hello. Hello, Rabbi.
How's it, Dave?
Fine, thanks, and you? Just want to
Hashem.
say how impressed I was by the transition ceremony the other night. It was terrific. So
Thank you.
well done. So well
Thank
done.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Just give me a minute to get the text up. Is that on my side or somebody else's phone ringing?
I think it's David. David, you should mute yourself until you want to speak.
I'm just doing that. I'm doing that. It's actually my computer that does it.
Well, you can mute the computer too. Guess what?
Yeah, I have.
The only one you can't mute is your wife.
I've tried. It's a hopeless task. Rabbi, a question while, if I may, are you busy?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to know, going through these, particularly yesterday's, there seemed to be some contradictions with things that were said near the beginning of the class about consecrations and oaths and things, compared to later on. Earlier on, it said they were not allowed, and later on it said they were allowed. That was question one.
Why didn't you ask yesterday's teacher?
And question two was to do with an aliyah. It was mentioned that when one has an aliyah, if you pledge a matana, it is meant specifically for the gaboim, not for the upkeep of the shul, etc.
What you mean the Gaboyim? Nobody makes donations on the Bimah to the Gaboyim personally.
Yeah, but it seemed, yeah, it seemed that was the meaning that was given. That's why I'm questioning it. So it's always for the shul.
Some people are nice; they give the rabbi also, but the shul is the main beneficiary.
Yes. That's
I haven't
what
heard
I
of
thought.
anybody giving gaboim. In the olden days, it was more popular to give the rabbi, the chazan, the shamus, in addition, but the main one is to the shul.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Okay, let's get started. I have a confession, and that is that I nearly forgot about the shir completely, and thank God I just got a reminder and I ran to the computer. But I must confess, I had a variety of workmen here in my house today on a whole bunch of issues, and I'm going to have to grope through this. I confess I have not prepared this, so I hope it goes smoothly. And I still owe Kent an answer from last week, and would you believe I have consulted a number of scholars in town, and I haven't gotten clarity yet. So just to recap, last week we had about the Nazir, the Nazirite, who was a doubtful mitzorah. And the question Kent asked was an excellent question. How could it be a doubtful mitzorah? Either the Kohen said he's tameh or he's tahor. It's either or. And I've looked into it, and I've even consulted scholars in the community who I respect their knowledge. And one said that sometimes the signs on the body are not clear, but I wasn't happy with that, because if he can't pronounce it Tomei, then he's not Tomei. So I asked a Dayan on the Beth Din, who's a great scholar, and he's coming back to me. So stay tuned, Kent.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I didn't mean to put you to so much trouble. Thank you.
Not for lack of trying that I didn't post the answer yet.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Right, let's go, and let's hope that I can manage here with not having prepared, and my apologies to you for that. Chapter 7 of Arochim V'Charomim, which means, as Dave said, donations that one gives to the temple, and consecrations that one makes to the temple, of a different variety of types of donations, where they say I give my worth or someone else's worth, and then how do you work that out? Consecrated articles may not be redeemed. So you should have learned already, if you're on chapter 7, I assume you learned that if one makes a donation to the temple and then he changes his mind, he has a change of heart, he's really nostalgic about this thing that he gave away and he wants to get it back, he can reclaim it, but he'll have to deconsecrate it. He'll have to redeem it, which means he has to give either something of similar value, and he also has to add a 20% surcharge to the temple for that pleasure, for that privilege. Now he's saying that consecrated articles may not be redeemed, however, with land or servants, for the Torah equates servants and land. Likewise, promissory notes for the physical substance is not a financial worth. It's interesting, I actually learned this in my Gemara shir. On Tuesday night, I have a Gemara shir in Bava Metzia, which is going for some 34 years. And we just learned this very idea here, that land and servants and promissory notes have a different status in halacha with regard to consecration and deconsecration, and also with a number of different halachic areas, which we don't have time to go into now. A promissory note is an IOU. Is an IOU have intrinsic value? The answer is no. It's just a piece of paper, unlike a cash, which has intrinsic value, even though it's sort of made for, it represents the gold in the national treasury, but a 100 Rand note has intrinsic value, whereas a promissory note, you have to go collect it still. You may never collect it, who knows? So their physical substance and all the above is not considered of financial worth. And he shall give the silver, says the verse in the Chumash, which means silver or movable property like silver, even bran, it doesn't matter. If you give enough bran, it could amount to a lot of money. But land and servants and promissory notes may not be used to deconsecrate something. 2, whenever a person redeems his consecrated property, he must add an additional fifth, as I said, whether it's he, his wife, or his heirs, whoever's doing the deconsecration. Let's say the husband or father consecrated something, and then maybe he died, and the family want to get it back for sentimental reasons. They too will have to give something of similar value or the cash value plus a fifth. And this fifth must also be movable property, can't be land, etc., or it could be cash. 3, when a person redeems the consecrated articles, failure to pay the additional fifth does not hold back the redemption. So the redemption is effective, it happens. He owes 20%. So the temple treasurer, the Kohen in charge of the temple treasury, can take him to the Beth Din to get the 20%, but it does not mean that the redemption has not been effective. Once he's paid the principal, the consecrated article has gone back to being chulin, to being an ordinary article, and is permitted to benefit from it, unlike consecrated articles, which we may not have any personal benefit from. And if we do, we have committed sacrilege, and we have to pay a penalty, and we have to bring a sacrifice. According to rabbinic law, however, it is forbidden to benefit from it until one does pay the additional fifth. That's just as a precaution the rabbis put in, because otherwise you may forget it, the never plan. You never got around to it. Nevertheless, on Shabbos, the sages gave permission to partake of a consecrated article that was redeemed, even if the fifth was not paid. Another reason for leniency is because the temple treasurers can be relied upon to remind him. We're not relying on his own memory or his own reminder in his diary. The temple treasurers will come looking for the money that's owed them. 4, with regard to animals consecrated for the sake of a sacrifice on the altar, which were then disqualified by a blemish, and they cannot be offered on the altar if they're blemished. So if the person who consecrated it redeems it, he must add an additional fifth, as is the rule with other things. The person who consecrated for his own purposes is the one obligated to add a fifth, not the one who derives atonement through the sacrifice after it was redeemed. One is obligated to add a fifth when redeeming the article that was consecrated originally, but one need not add a fifth when redeeming an article whose consecration was a derivative. What does that mean? Verse in Leviticus, if the one who consecrated it will redeem his home, he must add a fifth. Verse mentioned one who consecrated and not one who extends that holiness. Accordingly, now he explains what that means. If one transferred the holiness of a consecrated animal, whether one consecrated for the sake of improvements to the temple or for a sacrifice, and became blemished, and he now switches it to another animal, okay, it became blemished or something, and he now moves the sanctity from this animal A, to animal B. When he redeems the second animal to which he transferred the holiness, he is not required to add a fifth. So it's basically saying that on the original deconsecration, you have to add a fifth, but if there's a secondary deconsecration, you will be exempt from adding that fifth. 6, an unresolved doubt. You see, Kent, sometimes doubts are unresolved, maybe. There's an unresolved doubt in the following situation. The person set aside a guilt offering for the sake of his atonement, and the animal became blemished. So he added a fifth to its value and transferred his holiness to another animal and received atonement by sacrificing another guilt offering. As explained elsewhere, the animal to which the holiness was transferred is left to pasture until it becomes blemished, and then its holiness transferred to a third animal, which is sacrificed as a burnt offering, korban olah. The question is, are we required to add a fifth when redeeming that animal because it is a burnt offering? It involves another body, a different animal, consecrated for a different purpose, or are we not so required because its holiness stems from the initial consecration for which a fifth was already added? So this is a suffix, this is a doubt, and it has not been resolved. 7. You know, they say in Yiddish, there's a Yiddish proverb. I'm looking at the list of participants and I see there are some well-known Yiddish speakers here. In Yiddish, there's a proverb, "Von a Kasche starbt man nicht." Nobody ever died from having an unresolved question. So I assume that we will all still live long, happy years, even though we have not resolved the question number 6. Just again, just a reminder that the gentlemen who are joining the share should please cover their heads in whatever way they like to, yarmulkes, caps, unless you want to look like those guys at the weddings who put on serviettes on their heads for benching, which doesn't look too pretty. Thank you. The concept of 7, the concept of exchanging an animal does not apply with regard to animals consecrated for the sake of improvements to the temple. So it's not for a sacrifice, but it is for the temple. The temple might need an ox to do some plowing in some property that the temple owns. So the guy donated an ox to do plowing. It's not for a sacrifice on the altar. So exchanging animals does not apply with regard to animals for the sake of improvements. So the Torah dealt with kind of exchange only with regard to animals consecrated for sacrifice on the altar. Meaning, if a person had an ordinary animal and an animal consecrated for the sake of improvements to the temple before him, and he said, let this one be in exchange for this one, the statements are of no consequence. Meaning the original animal remains temple property. If, however, he says this one is in place of this one, zu temurat zu, which is a different language, then, or he says the holiness of this one is transferred to the other, then his statements are binding. The first animal will return to ordinary, mundane status and may be used, and its holiness becomes attached to the second, which is reserved for temple use. 8, the initial and preferred manner is that both animals consecrated for the sake of the improvement of the temple and entities consecrated for the sake of the altar that became blemished should be redeemed only for their worth. When transgressed and redeemed them for less than their worth, you have to give the value. You may not cheat the temple by giving something of less value if you're deconsecrated. You have to give the full value. You can give more, but not less. Even if you redeem consecrated right worth 100 dinim with an article worth a pruta, the article is redeemed, it's effective, and it's considered as ordinary property, and you're permitted to benefit from it. According to rabbinic law, it's necessary to evaluate its worth, and the person redeeming it is obligated to make up the monetary difference. So you have to make it up. But even if you redeemed 1,000 rand worth of a 1,000 rand animal for 10 rand, the redemption is effective, and then the exchange happens, but you just owe that money to the temple. Explaining here, number 9, the above, a person had an animal consecrated for the altar became blemished if it's worth 10 zuz, 10 rand. And there's an ordinary animal worth 5, and he says the holiness of this one's transferred to this, it is redeemed. and the previously sacred one becomes ordinary. However, he must pay the additional $5 to the temple treasury. Similarly, when the animal was consecrated to the temple treasury, it becomes ordinary. It may be shorn and put to work, and the second animal assumes its consecrated status, but by rabbinic law, he has to pay the missing money to make up the value to the temple. 10. If 3 people evaluated the 2 animals involved and said they were of equivalent value, okay, now we have to, who has the responsibility and the privilege of deciding how much this animal is worth? So the guy who deconsecrates says, here's an animal exchange of the first one. Yeah, it's worth the same. The temple treasurer, the Kohen, who's an expert, looks at it. He says, Bobemaisis, you're giving me an inferior animal. This is no way that this is worth as much as your first donation. So if 3 people evaluated 2 animals and they said they were of equivalent value, the evaluation is not nullified, even if 100 come afterwards and say that the animal that was consecrated was worth more. Since the evaluation of the animal's worth is a rabbinic requirement, our sages were not strict. If, however, 2 people made the original evaluation, and then 3 people came and said that the slightest advantage was taken of the temple treasury, meaning that he paid less than it was worth, the animal will be re-evaluated. So if 3, it's like a Beth Din, and it's more lasting and permanent than if just 2 people made that evaluation. 11, we do not redeem consecrated articles with a rough estimation. Can't just say, approximately so much and so much. No, it has to be a proper, careful evaluation. If one redeemed the consecrated article, because you don't want to cheat the temple, right? So you have to make sure that you evaluate it properly. If one redeemed the consecrated article after making a rough estimation, the temple treasury is given the upper hand. Meaning if the temple treasurer, the Kohen in charge of the treasury, says you underpaid, the one you gave us to deconsecrate it, to redeem it, was not as valuable as the original one you donated. And he says it was, the temple treasurer always has the upper hand because they're not equals. The temple is on a higher level because it's godly. And therefore, the temple treasury always gets the upper hand in any dispute. So if one says, may the holiness of this cow that's consecrated be transferred to this cow. By the way, this is where the phrase holy cow comes from. You know that. That's just my own personal commentary. Okay. May the holiness of this cow that is consecrated be transferred to this cow, or may the holiness of this garment be transferred to this garment. The consecrator is redeemed. It works. It's effective. But the temple treasury will be given the upper hand to decide if it's worth enough. If the second article is worth more than the first, the temple treasurers take it and remain silent. They're going to keep shtum. They're going to tell you, you gave us too much? No way. You can give more. That's okay. But you may not give less. That's why I say it's not among equals, and therefore the temple treasury always has the upper hand. If it's not worth the value, then he has to pay the difference and still add the 5th. If, however, he said, may the holiness of this garment that is consecrated be transferred to this garment that is worth 10 selas, 10,000 rand, or 10 or 100 rand, $10, whatever. Or may the holiness of this cow that be transferred to this cow that is worth 10 slime. He's required to add a 5th and must give 2.5 slime, which is a 5th. You may think it's 25%, but there's a different way of calculating this. The rationale is that he redeemed it at a fixed price. It's not necessary to add a 5th when redeeming the second animal, as we explained. Only the initial one. 12. If he redeems an article from the temple treasury, if he drew the article into his possession when it was worth a mana, that's like 100 rand, but did not pay the money until it appreciated to 200 rand. Okay, the price of cows went up. There was a drought, and suddenly you can't get a your lobola is going to cost you a lot of money now. The price of cows went up, or whatever it is. It could have been something else he donated, and the price went up. So he drew it into his possession, but he hadn't yet paid. When he drew it into his possession, it was only worth 100. When he comes to pay, the Kohen says, hey, and this is now worth 200. So he's going to have to pay the extra, because it only becomes his when, not when he takes it, but when he pays. If he drew it into his possession when it was worth 200, but he didn't pay until it depreciated to 100, he still has to pay 200. As I told you before, the legal power of the temple treasury should not be less than that of an ordinary person, and the temple treasury always gets the upper hand. 13, if he redeemed it at 200 and paid the money, but did not draw it into his possession until it depreciated, he acquired it when he paid the money. He should draw his article into his possession, and the temple treasury acquires the 200. So if he paid it, he paid it. If he redeemed it at 100 and paid the money, but did not draw it into his possession until it appreciated, the redemption is allowed to stand. Because he already paid the money, we said that's the most important thing, and therefore he saved $100. In this instance, we don't say the legal power of the temple treasury should not be less. The rationale, the reason is that an ordinary person would not be able to retract unless he receives a mishapora. Mishapora is it's like a curse. It's the opposite of a misha berach. You know, you get an aliyah on the bimah, you get a misha berach. Misha berach havateinu, he who blessed our forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, should bless Yankel ben Baruch and his family with whatever they need, etc., etc. Mishapora is the opposite. He who punished the generation of the flood, the generation of the Tower of Babel, all those, the Sodom, the wicked generations, should punish someone who cheats another Jew, or cheats the temple, or whatever. That's called a mishapora. So we're not talking about that here, but we would not administer mishaporas to matters to do with temple treasury, only with personal cheating from another individual. 14, when a person consecrates all of his possessions and he's liable to pay the money due his wife by virtue of his ksuba, or promissory notes owed to creditors, the woman may not collect the money due to her by virtue of the ksuba from temple treasury, nor may a creditor collect the debt due him, because the consecration absolves all prior liens. Nevertheless, when the temple treasury sells his property and the field loses its consecrated status, the creditor and his wife may collect it from the redeemer, for the lien remains on this landed property. So, generally speaking, when you get married, you have a ksuba, and the ksuba is the husband's antenuptial contract, where if he predeceases his wife or divorces her, he has to pay X amount of money, and 200 zuz for a virgin bride, or 100 zuz for a second marriage. And it's quite a lot of money, actually. I remember that Moshe Feinstein back in the 60s calculated that 200 zuz, which sounds like $200, was more like $25,000. Can you imagine what that is today? It's a couple of million. Anyway, the point is, now, whatever property the husband has at the time of the wedding becomes, there's a lien on that property to pay the wife's ksuba. So if he has no cash, if he's not liquid, then they would take the field, sell the field, and give the wife the money. if he got married and then later he sold a field property that he owned at the time of the marriage, there's a lien on that property, and if there's no other money, the wife can go to the Beth Din and they will take that property away from the buyer because there was a lien on it when he bought it, because he owed the money to the wife from the ksuba beforehand. The problem is that the same law does not apply with the temple. So if the husband consecrates all his possessions, his whole estate, to the temple, she's going to have difficulty collecting the ksuba. She can do it afterwards if they sell it, but it's not going to be so simple for her. So if there's a vindictive ex-husband who wants to fix his wife if she shouldn't get any money, this is one solution for him. He can just donate his whole estate to the temple. But usually vindictive men aren't so generous and they want the money for themselves. So I can't see them doing that. 15, what is compared to two purchasers. One bought the property from a woman's husband, the other from the first purchaser. The woman wrote to the first purchaser, said, I have no claim against you. But after he sells it to the second person, she may expropriate the money due her from him. So this is expropriation without compensation. The guy's going to lose out. He's going to have to give his money because there was a lien on this from when she got married. 16, how is it redeemed? We administer an oath to the woman or the creditor first. Whoever seeks to expropriate property that has a lien, then we publicly announce its sale for 60 days every morning and evening. How much the person will desire to give for this field in order to pay the woman due her by virtue of her ksuba or the creditor his debt. The purchaser redeems it and acquires it even for a dinner, which is a small amount. Then the redeemer comes and gives the woman her amount of her ksuba from this money. Even if it was 100 zuz and the field was worth only 90, he still has to give her the full amount. If, however, the debt was twice the value of the field's worth 100 and the lien on the ksuba was 200, we do not redeem it with the intent of paying the debt or the ksuba. Instead, it is redeemed unconditionally. For such a stipulation was required to make it would not be redeemed at all. I'm not sure what that means. Okay, sorry, we're running late. I'm going to have to go through the rest quickly. When a person consecrates all of his property, divorces his wife, and leaves her to collect the money due her by virtue of her ksuba from the one who redeems his landed property from the temple treasury, she cannot collect the debt until he takes a vow forbidding her to benefit from him. This is a safeguard instituted lest an attempt be made to deceive the temple treasury. We do not say that were he to desire to nullify the consecration of property, he should say, I consecrated in error, and ask a sage to nullify his consecration, in which instance the property would return to him. I'm going to quickly run down to see the note here at the bottom. So 57 here explains what we're worried that there was a swindle here. There was a shmuchel that the husband and the wife conspired to do something here, that he would remarry her afterwards and retake possession of a portion of his property in this way. So, all right. So, in other words, we're afraid of a rouge that may have been concocted by the husband and wife. He divorces her. She then collects her ksuba from the guy who bought the property, and then he remarries her. So he's got his cake and eat it too. He sold the property, kept the money, and now he got his property back because it went to his wife for her ksuba. That's quite a clever shmuchel. So we don't allow that to happen. We're worried about that. Similarly, after consecrating his property, a person's word is not accepted if he says, I owe a money to so-and-so, or this utensil belongs to so-and-so. We fear that he's attempting to deceive the temple treasury. Even if the creditor has a promissory note, he has something in writing, he cannot use it to expropriate the property from the temple treasury. Instead, he must collect his due like the other creditors, as explained. 19, when does this apply with regard to a healthy person? If, however, a guy is laying on his deathbed and consecrates all his property at that time, and he also says, I owe $100 to so-and-so, his word is accepted. We think that when a guy is about to meet his maker, we don't think he's going to cheat the temple. That's not too clever, right? A person will not try to deceive the temple treasury at the time of his death and sin for the sake of others. He's going to die. So we believe him. If he did not say, give the creditor, we did not give him the money unless he has a promissory note whose authenticity has been verified. He may then collect his debt from the temple treasury. If he said to give the money after he consecrates property, we don't listen to him. Instead, the person is considered like any other creditor. If the authenticity of his promissory note is verified, he must take an oath, and then only may he expropriate the property from the one who redeems it from the temple treasury, but not from the temple treasury itself. And finally, number 20, we do not take heed of a rumor that says a certain person declared all of his property ownerless, or consecrated it, or made it a dedication offering, unless there is clear proof of its validity. You can't rely on hearsay. It has to be through the testimony of witnesses or a written contract that has been verified. Otherwise, anybody can make up any kind of story, and the wife or creditors will be denied what's coming to them. Okay, everybody, any questions before we say cheers?
Rabbi, can I ask, an offering, if it whether it's truma or it's a dedication offering, how does it get allocated? Do we know that, the temple treasury, when an offering comes in? I mean, is it to the priests that are on duty at the time, or how do they?
First of all, Teruma does not go
Look
to
it
the
up.
temple treasury. Teruma goes to the Kohen of your choice.
Yeah, oh, of your choice. Oh, I didn't know that. Right.
Truma, the Israelite can give his Truma to any Kohen he chooses. Like a Pidyon Haben, you can choose any Kohen you like to give the 5 shekels for your son. Or challah, the portion of challah that you take off the dough, you can give it to the Kohen of your choice. That's the only measure of ownership that the Israelite has. It's not his, he has to give it away. But he does have the ability to choose which Kohen to give it to. Now, a donation to the temple is made by the individual to the temple. He can say it in his own house, and then he has to deliver it. Have I answered the question?
Yes, and then the treasury decides how it's going to be allocated. That
Once it's given to the temple treasury, they can do what they like with it, unless he said it's for a sacrifice on the altar. Then it has to be given for that purpose.
Right,
But if he just donated to the temple treasury for its use, if it's an ox, they can plow it, use it to plow, or they can sell it and keep the cash as they prefer. Any other questions?
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Have a
Rabbi.
great week, everybody. Sei gesund.
Bye.
All the
Thank you,
best.
Rabbi. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.